In March, Meta lost two jury trials on back-to-back days, one in New Mexico and one in California. Here's what happened. The first case was in New Mexico, where in 2023, the state's attorney general sued Meta under the state's Unfair Practices Act. The New Mexico lawsuit immediately followed an undercover law enforcement investigation where agents created fake minor accounts on Facebook and Instagram and were immediately flooded with sexually explicit and predatory messages. After a 7-day jury trial, the jury deliberated for only 1 day but found Meta liable on both claims under the Unfair Practices Act for both misleading consumers and endangering children. The jury found Meta had violated the state's Unfair Practices Act 75,000 times, and at a maximum penalty of $5,000 per violation, the jury imposed a penalty against Meta for $375 million. The second case involved a young woman in California identified only as Kaylee who brought claims against both Meta and Google, claiming that the design of their platforms was to have her use the apps compulsively, which resulted in both anxiety and depression. Kaylee's lawsuit is a bellwether case. It's a lawsuit that's tied to 2,000 other pending lawsuits against the platforms brought by both parents and school districts who are arguing that these platforms should be treated as product manufacturers. The plaintiff's legal team showed the jury internal Meta documents, including one in which executives wrote, quote, "If we want to win big with teens, we must bring them in as tweens, despite the platform's minimum age requirement being 13. At the end of March, a jury found Meta and Google negligent, concluding that both platforms were deliberately built to be addictive and that executives knew this and that they failed to protect their youngest users. The jury awarded $3 million in compensatory damages and an additional $3 million in punitive damages, with Meta being found responsible for 70% of the damages. Now here's why both of these cases matter beyond the dollar amounts awarded. Both verdicts bypass Section 230, the federal law that has shielded tech companies from liability for nearly 30 years. They did it not by attacking users' speech or user-generated content, but by attacking the design of the platform. Right now, Meta has announced that they plan to appeal both decisions. That means I don't expect users are going to see much differences on the platforms for the time being. That being said, the New Mexico case has a second phase set to begin in the beginning of May. In that phase, a judge, and not a jury, is going to decide whether Meta, through its platform, has created a public nuisance. If the court finds that Meta created a public nuisance, the court may be in a position to order Meta to impose certain minimum age verification requirements or certain removals of predatory accounts from the platforms. While there may not be noticeable changes on the platforms immediately, and while the floodgates may not be entirely open for all lawsuits against these platforms, the landscape has certainly shifted significantly. This is the first time that juries have been allowed to view and consider social media platforms as defective products. A common theme in both the New Mexico and the California cases against Meta were that the cases were not just about what Meta did. They were about also what Meta knew they were doing while they were doing it, which is all the more reason why parents remain the first and last line of defense for their children while using these platforms. Here's a few things that parents can do to help. First, delay access to these platforms to your children. The evidence in both of these cases suggests that early exposure is the highest risk period. Second, use the platform's parental controls and screen time limits, but don't rely on them alone. The testimony in these cases showed that Meta's own safety tools were inadequate. So third and finally, have direct conversations with your kids about what they're seeing on these platforms. It is true that the courts are starting to hold these companies accountable, but until legislation catches up, parents still must remain vigilant. The catch-22 at play is that for Meta to most effectively implement these potentially mandatory safety measures, they're going to need to capture more identifying information from their users. That could be in the form of government IDs, biometric information, or AI facial recognition. Other valid concerns would be the applicability of any additional or new minimum age requirements. For example, would Meta require all of its users, regardless of the reported age, to submit government IDs or submit to facial recognition for purposes of verifying your identity? While these two cases were certainly landmark decisions by juries showing that these social media platforms can be held to legal standards outside of Section 230, the ultimate impact on these platforms and the users involved remain to be seen. Our firm will stay tuned to this lawsuit and will provide updates along the way.